Hello, welcome. Can everybody hear me in the back? Yeah, we're good. Good. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Happy to see everybody here present. We have really good weather today. My name is Pedro Enrique Puentes. I am a graduate student in the history department, and on behalf of the organizing committee, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to another What Matters to Me and Why talk at UC Irvine. First, some housekeeping announcements. This talk is being filmed. By entering the room, you have consented to being filmed. If you would not like to appear on the video, please move to the back of the room. Also, please wait for the microphone during the question and answer session. Last, you are welcome to eat the lunch in the room or take it with you after the talk. As staff, faculty, and students, we spend much of our time dealing with exams, homework, lectures, budgets, personnel, and other topics, doing the things that are required to keep the university and our careers running. What matters to me and why is a chance to take a few minutes each month to stop and take a bit of a break. Every month, we have the opportunity to hear from someone who shaped UC Irvine through their daily activities. They give a short, informal talk, followed by ample time for questions and discussion. There is no prescribed topic. Speakers are asked simply to answer the question, what matters to me and why? Authentically, frankly, and take it wherever it goes. The series provides a forum for speakers to talk about values, beliefs, and motivations, and perhaps to share how these have been shaped by their personal experiences, including both the highs and lows encountered along the way. The hope is to strengthen bonds between the faculty, students, and staff who teach, learn, and work here, and celebrate both the diversity of our community and the commonalities that bind us together. One thing that is really nice about What Matters to Me and Why is that it brings together people from all across campus, as well as undergrads, grad students, staff, and faculty. So it is our tradition to give the people the chance to introduce themselves to each other. If you are on Zoom, please share your name, where you're from, and your affiliation in the chat box. This will take about a minute or two, and then we'll bring you back and get started with introducing our speaker. Thank you.
All right, well, let me bring you back. Our speaker today is Jonathan Feng, who is a distinguished professor of physics and astronomy in the School of Physical Sciences. And I have to admit, my name, by the way, is Claire Yu. I am also in the school, in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. So Jonathan is my colleague. And I have been waiting a very long time, about a decade, for him to give this talk.
No pressure.
So it is high time. And the reason is because he is actually the one who founded and started this series back in 2012. He went to the chancellor with a colleague, and they pitched it to the chancellor at the time, who agreed to sponsor this in an effort to improve campus climate and our understanding of our community and each other. And so Jonathan created this as a forum for people to tell their personal stories. And he was chair of the organizing committee for the first decade, and then conned me into taking over. And in physics, we have the tradition that if you organize something, you don't speak at it. Other fields don't have that tradition, but we do in physics. So he has not spoken. But finally, he is going to tell us his story today, and I am very much looking forward to that. Let me first tell you a little bit about him. Jonathan was born in Michigan and grew up in Northern California, just east of Berkeley. He was an undergraduate at Harvard and then studied in Cambridge, England as a Marshall Scholar, and he was a physics major, obviously, and then returned to California for his PhD at Stanford. After his PhD, he did postdoctoral work at the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton. You may remember that if you saw the Oppenheimer movie, Einstein was there. And then he went to MIT, also supposed to do postgraduate work before joining the faculty here at UCI in 2002. And he has become both a professor and a chancellor's fellow in 2006. So Jonathan's work studies the very small and the very large. He explores deep connections between our understanding of the universe at the smallest and largest length scales, from neutrinos and quarks to black holes and dark matter. And in physics, you have to realize we separate. There are two kinds of physicists. There are experimentalists who work in the lab, and there are theorists who kind of work on computers and pen and paper. And although Jonathan was trained as a theoretical physicist, he is also currently leading an experiment in Geneva at CERN called Phaser, which recently detected the highest energy neutrinos ever produced in a lab. So Jonathan is a Guggenheim Fellow and a Simons Investigator, and he serves in the presidential line of the International Organization of Chinese Physicists and Astronomers. In 2022, he received the Dean's Honorary Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching and the Physics Department's Outstanding Faculty Award for Graduate Teaching. Now, Jonathan's a man of many talents. Not only is he an extremely accomplished physicist, but he is also a musician. And he suggested that I mention that he played he spent a lot of his youth playing music, in particular the trumpet. He was in a video with Wynton Marsalis, who's the famed jazz trumpeter, and he won the Stanford Concerto composition by playing the Arutian Trumpet Concerto. So let me give it over to Jonathan, and let us welcome him to the podium.
Okay, am I on? Everyone can hear? Great. Okay, we'll pull up the slide later. So first, thanks to Claire for the kind introduction and also for taking over this series. It is true, I conned her into it. And thanks to all the organizers for inviting me to talk. So as you heard, until recently, I was an organizer. So these organizers actually know me well. And despite that, they invited me to talk. So I'm very grateful for that. And I also want to thank all of you for coming, both those of you who are here in the room, and also I think there are several on Zoom. It's just great to see so many people from all parts of my UCI career here. One of the previous What Matters to Me and Why speakers said, it's a little bit like attending your own funeral. And she was right, but she didn't say that it's like attending your own funeral, but also being asked to deliver the eulogy, which is a double whammy, which I hadn't really anticipated until now. But that is the case, but it's just so nice to see everyone here. I especially want to thank one person, my wife, Sue, who's here. We have a cross-cultural marriage. That's because I'm in physics and she's in engineering. And to the people who are here on this side of the campus, you know, the humanities side, maybe physics, engineering, come on, it's all about the same thing. I can tell you it's not. And let me give you a little anecdote to drive this home. Early on, when we were just getting to know each other, we had a slight disagreement. And in exasperation, Sue said to me, "You have the common sense of a theoretical physicist." And we joke about that because it's funny, because I actually thought when she said it, that was a compliment. I thought, wow, thank you. Now, after several decades, I know that when an engineer says you have the common sense of a theoretical physicist, it's not a compliment. Okay, it's not a compliment. And so Sue has been very long suffering, and just so grateful for her and for the life we have together. We also have two boys, Daniel and Matthew. They're in school right now, so they're not here. But they're wonderful people. And I just say that when Daniel was like 3 months old, I saw an older man. You know, here I was bleary-eyed with no sleep and stuff. I said, "This man, you have kids. You know, what's the best age for kids?" And he said to me, "Every age is the best age for kids. You just get better and better." And I thought, what a load of, you know, no one believes that. I know there's like the terrible twos and there's the teenage years. Come on, they don't just get better and better. But I have to admit that guy was actually right. And these kids just get better and better, at least so far. And we'll see if it keeps going. But I'm sorry they couldn't be here. All right, so let me start then by putting back up this slide. Oh, great, so here it is. So this is a cover story from Scientific American. And this article, Hidden Worlds of Dark Matter, is one wrote with a friend, Mark Trotton. And it was about our research, which is on basically trying to understand the contents of the universe. What is the universe made of at the most sort of basic fundamental level? And also, how does that inform what we think about where the universe is going and where it came from, its origin and its fate? And I put this up here because this image is in some sense responsible for this series. When this came out, I had some friends here in the faculty at UCI who were very kind and said, it'd be interesting to hear you talk about this story and what's in it. And as we were talking, it became clear that it wasn't just research that was interesting, but what was interesting is how it related to the bigger part of your life. Why did you come into this field? Why are you studying it? Why is it exciting? What are the highs? What are the lows? And we realized that there was a lot to be said about this. And also there was very few places at UCI where you could talk about this. And so from that, after a series of interesting steps, which I don't have time to go into, this series was founded and has been going on now for some 12 years or so. And once you create a series, well, then you have to invite people to talk in it. And then they say, well, what about? And you say, what matters to you and why? And they say, and what am I supposed to talk about? Because it's not very specific, right? So that is the topic, but we had to come up with something a little bit more pointed. And so we gave a few more things. So some guidelines where one thing you could talk about was your personal journey, the choices made, difficulties encountered, commitments grasped, and joys revealed. And that little phrasing has sort of been repeated through year after year, and that's sort of the guidance we give to speakers. And so I will indeed follow that advice. I think it's very interesting. If you want to understand a universe, it helps to go back in time. If you want to understand a person, it helps to go back in time. And certainly if you want to understand yourself, it really helps to go back in time. And I think this is beautifully sort of expressed by William Faulkner in this quote, "The past is not dead, it's not even past." So let me go back. As mentioned, I was born in Michigan. I was born in a Christian family, in a very academically blessed family. We had tons of intellectual stimulation, books all over the place, mathematical puzzles, math books, all sorts of fun things to think about. By the time I was like 3, we moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, just long enough for me to basically become a Steelers fan for the rest of my life. And then by the time I was 7, I ended up in Northern California. So as also mentioned, I grew up in Walnut Creek and Lafayette, towns that are just east of Berkeley. And I thought maybe I'd start by just telling you a bit about some of the teachers who basically were very formative for me in terms of making me understand what a good teacher was and in directing me to what I ended up doing. One of the teachers was Mrs. McClellan from 7th grade math. I still remember the first day we came to class, and you know how the first day of middle school is. Nothing ever happens, right? You just sit there and they try to figure out, well, you're not supposed to be in this class and you're supposed to be over there. Totally different with Mrs. McClellan. We showed up. She said, okay, you guys got to seat yourselves alphabetically by last name. The A's are over in this corner. It goes to Z over there. Go. And we are like, what? Where am I supposed to sit? And then we gradually realized, well, I guess we better start asking each other what our names were, right? And so she said, come on, you've got 3 minutes. We got tons of math to learn this year, and you need to start now and get done. And so we all got up and started talking, figuring out who's supposed to sit where. And amazingly, in 3 minutes, we were all seated alphabetically by last name. And that wasn't the only thing she did. She also decided somewhere along the line that computers were going to be playing a role in our future. And she had the school buy a computer. So Oak Grove Intermediate had one computer. It was a TRS-80 from Radio Shack. If you know what I'm talking about, that really dates you, okay? And no one knew what to do with this thing. So when we finished math early, she would let us go to this other room and play with the computer. First time I walked in there, there's this box with a computer in it. never been opened. We had to open it up, unbox it, take all the plastic off, figure out how to plug it in, and that was it. But basically, the thing I got from her is that she set the standards very high. She expected you to do something interesting with that computer. And I still remember after a year, it took 20 minutes to set the thing up every time we went in there. So there wasn't a lot of progress. But after a year, we learned this fancy thing called trigonometry and got the thing to plot a circle on the screen. And that was just awesome. That was like the greatest achievement. But she set the standards very high, and she expected you to meet them. And that's something that I hope to sort of copy in my teaching. Another teacher I had was Dwayne Fee. He was a 9th grade math teacher. He set, walking into his classroom was like being in a courthouse. I mean, he was the judge. This was his room, and you better stick with his rules. He was an Iowa farm boy when he grew up, and he had certain ways of doing things. But he also emphasized to me that, it was very interesting. You could talk when he was talking as long as you were talking about math. As long as you were learning something, he didn't care whether you were laughing or joking or being loud. That didn't matter as long as you were actually making progress in learning something. And on the other hand, I still remember one boy made fun of another kid for asking a question. And man, he got sent to the office. Before he got sent to the office, he was told to stand there, and Mr. Fee just yelled at him for like 5 minutes. It's something that's seared into my memory. But he sort of got this idea that the classroom is sort of like a sacred space. And later in my high school career, I actually was very lucky and got to go to get an award from the White House from Ronald Reagan. So this also sets the years. Some of you students are like, oh my God, I can't believe this guy's that old. But went to the White House to get an award from Ronald Reagan, and we were allowed to bring one teacher. And so I brought Mr. Fee, and I still just remember the smile he had on his face from finally getting some recognition after decades teaching in the public schools. So as you might guess, then I got pretty into math because both of these were great math teachers. And so I went to college, and 2 things that happened in college. One is I had physics teachers who were just out of this world. My freshman intro physics teacher was a guy named Sidney Coleman, who for decades had been teaching advanced quantum field theory, which is like the hardest course in physics when you take in your second year of graduate school. But for some reason, he got forced to teach freshman physics for 2 years. And I happened to be a freshman in those 2 years. And he just gave the greatest lectures. And so he was one of them. There were others. The second thing that happened is that I went to a meeting for math majors. And this grand old math professor, Andrew Gleason, told us, it's great that you're interested in math, but you should know if you want to be a math major or a mathematician, you're going to end up working by yourself your whole life. And I thought, that sounds terrible. That's like the worst. I like math, but do I like it enough to sort of resign myself to decades and decades of sort of academic celibacy, just by yourself? And so that just sounded terrible. And so after that, I switched into physics. And so I ended up being a physics major. Incidentally, I think that was actually absolutely terrible advice. There are good math papers written by 2 or more people, but I didn't know that, and so I switched. So by the end of college, I was a physics major, and I got it in my head that I wanted to go work with Stephen Hawking. So Stephen Hawking, I think many of you know who he is. He became this global sensation later. Even then, he was, of course, extremely famous. He had just written this book called A Brief History of Time, and that was making people aware of this guy who was supposed to be Einstein's successor, who was stuck in this wheelchair and couldn't talk. But he was doing fantastic stuff, and I thought this would be great to be his graduate student. So he worked in Cambridge, England, and I thought, okay, I should go there. But pretty quickly, I found out that you can't just sort of decide you're going to be Hawking's student and show up at his office and go kind of, hi, I'm now going to be your student. There was a system. And so this thing is called the Math Tripos Part 3. So the history is that at some point, the UK decided they needed to educate theoretical physicists, but there weren't enough of them for every university to do it separately. And so Cambridge very generously volunteered that they would create this program, and all the best students from the UK, but then eventually also from the world, so me with my Marshall Scholarship and students from Hong Kong and Singapore and Germany and India and everything, would all come to Cambridge and learn this basically master's level stuff. Of course, Cambridge didn't do this out of their generosity of their own heart. The whole point was they would then give you an exam and rank you, and then they would take the top people off and offer them PhD positions, and the rest could go back to where they came from. And so it was a great deal for Cambridge. So I said, okay, that's how they do it. I guess I need to get over there. So I was very, very happy. I got this Marshall Scholarship to go to the UK to study, and showed up in England to take this course. You take this courses, lectures for a whole year, and then no exams, no assessments whatsoever until the very last week. There's like a finals week. You take the entire year's worth of exams that week, and then they grade it and they do this thing. I still remember going to Cambridge, so I went to Trinity College, Cambridge, and the first thing you do is you go and sign in a book. So they line you all up, all these first-year students, line you up, get in this big line, you walk into this Wren library, which is itself a marvel. Christopher Wren designed it. And you get up to the front, and there's this giant book, like this big, and you sign your name. And to be helpful, they have an example where they have another book from the past that they lay out next to you. So you can see how to write your name. Turns out they just happened to pick the one. The book is from 1661, and the signature that they highlight is Isaac Newton. And so they're telling you, welcome to Trinity. We expect great things out of you. And that made a huge impression on me. The course was amazing. The students, I don't think I've ever been in a cohort of students that talented. And it was just an incredible experience. That wasn't the only thing, though. There was also music. And so, as Claire mentioned, music was a huge part of my early life. And being a brass player, trumpet player in Cambridge, England was just like a kid in a candy shop. They have this tradition of brass bands that we don't have in the US. There were, in the US, unless you're going to conservatory, you go to a normal college, you'd be lucky if you get like one tuba player who can play. Go to Cambridge, there's just rows and rows of tuba players. And of course, 5 times as many trumpets and 3 times as many trombones. You could just form any old group and just, within 5 minutes, organize a fantastic group. A trio, quartet, quintet, octet, dectet, giant orchestras with giant choirs singing behind them. I remember, playing in Ely Cathedral, off-stage trumpet solos where you're up in some crazy, balcony somewhere, King's College Chapel, where you're, playing in some other rampart of some tower. I mean, just crazy stuff. And of course, the British have, hundreds and hundreds of years to collect holidays. So, for St. Stephen's Day, there's got to be a brass blah, blah, blah. And so someone's needed to go play, It was just an amazing experience. And I think at the end of the day, I played like 80 concerts, orchestra concerts, including Verdi's Requiem and Mahler's Second Symphony. And so those of you who are classical music fans, I mean, these are some of the great works of all time. But that was not the only aspect of England. And there was some less fun sides of it. And to try to illustrate that, let me give just an example of something that happened to me over this period of about just a few days. So one winter, I was asked to play the trumpet in this service. So this is the Christmas Eve service that's broadcast from King's College Chapel. So this is a service that started shortly after World War I as a memorial to the World War I dead. Has a fantastic tradition. It's got this wonderful boys choir, these totally angelic, pure bell-like voices, and senior choral scholars and an organist who's, the cream of the crop from all of England, and then sometimes one trumpet player. And so I remember being scared to death, literally, almost, playing. You had to go up to this organ loft and play the trumpet. As a trumpet player, you sit there for like 45 minutes doing nothing, and then you come in. It's freezing cold. It's Christmas Eve. This was not built with tons of insulation, right? So it's freezing cold. If your trumpet gets cold, it changes its tune. It's not in tune anymore. And so I'm trying to keep my trumpet warm. When you come in, the piece you play, you just play solid. And if you're out of tune at the beginning, you're going to be out of tune at the end, and you will have ruined this perfect service for these people who are celebrating Christmas. So it was very stressful, but in the end, I remember it worked out okay. I left this chapel and just felt such happiness that I was sort of part of this tradition. This service is broadcast by the BBC World Service, like around the world. And they told us, 100 million people will have heard you play. And it just felt so good to be in the center of this tradition. And the Christmas element, of course, appealed so much to me. And I felt like, I've come to this new country and I've sort of got to take part in its great traditions. A couple of days later, I had to go down to my college's office to pay my rooming bill. And I went down there and we got into an argument about how much I owed, which is fine. And I think probably many of you have done the same thing. But I still remember the last line this college officer said to me as we finished this argument. He said, we wouldn't have to have this conversation if you could speak English. And that, just cut to the bone for me. I had not experienced that before. And it became very clear that, although I was so happy to take part in this tradition, there are people who did not really see me as part of this tradition. And, kind of thought of me as a sort of an interloper. What are you doing here in Cambridge? The nice thing about that, and now in retrospect, I can look back and see it as an interesting growth experience, is that I learned basically what my parents and grandparents were like. So it's kind of crazy to have to go all the way to England to figure out who your parents are. You've eaten dinner with them for 17 years straight, and yet you don't know who they are. But I did learn what it's like to be a foreigner. So just briefly, my dad was born in Shanghai. His memories of childhood are really infused with war. Just a few years ago, I learned that he had a sister, my aunt, who I didn't even know existed, who died when she was about 12 or so, running away from bombs. Eventually, he and his family moved to Taiwan, and then he came to the US and met my mother. My mother was actually born in San Francisco, but her mother came from Beijing. My grandmother came from the Beijing to the US to study English at Pomona, which just blows me away. This 20-year-old single Asian woman shows up to study English in Pomona. And this is back in about the 1930s. But anyway, eventually she made her way up to the north and met my grandfather, who owned a print store in San Francisco, Chinatown. And that was the only place Chinese could own businesses. So of course he was in Chinatown. But they got married and then they had my mother. And obviously I kind of knew some of this beforehand, although not all of it. I mean, it's amazing how little my parents talked about much of this stuff when I was young. But it's interesting that, when I went to England and had these experiences and understood what it felt like to, not understand cultural references, be very slow to respond to things, whether it's just a funny response or a retort to an insult or something, it just made me much more appreciative of where I came from, sort of. And I think a quote that comes to mind, which now, given the internet, I know isn't the exact quote, But a nice paraphrase is something John Adams said. He said, my parents were soldiers so I could be a politician, so my kids could be artists. And if you replace artists with theoretical physicists, that pretty much works for me. All right, so then at the end of this time in England, we took our exam. This 1 week, he took the exam, he went back, and everyone just waited around for the exam results to come out. And eventually, I went to my pigeonhole, and there was this little piece of paper in there. So what the hell is a pigeonhole? So back then, there was no email. Well, there was email, but people in Cambridge didn't use it. There were no phones, no cell phones, of course, but there weren't even phones in student rooms. So communication took place through these little mailboxes, which were called pigeonholes. And you would go down there every day and see if you got any messages. And so one day I go down and there's a piece of paper and it says, Professor Hawking would like to see you. And so I went down to the department and went to his office, and he instantly kicked out this very senior famous physicist he was talking to, which made me feel really good. And then I sat down next to him and we had this conversation. And it's very hard to explain to you how it went, but he couldn't type. He would basically twitch, and he had this system where he could basically select letters. And so it was very slow, but people did tell me ahead of time, the one thing you do not do is complete his sentences for him. He hates that. So you just wait until each letter gets picked out, and then at the end, after the period, he will push a button and it'll play it and it'll say it out loud, and then you can respond. So this was about a 30-minute conversation, kind of summarize for you right now, but he offered me a PhD position. And I told him at that point I had decided I was going to go home. And he was very gracious, and he said, where's home? And I said, well, it's in the US, in California. And he said, well, that's a good place. You'll find good people to work with there. And so that was the whole conversation. So then, as Claire mentioned, then I went to Stanford for grad school and had a great time, great colleagues, great co-students, great graduate advisor. Went on to do a postdoc and then another postdoc, and those years were hard. The point of being a postdoc is to get a faculty position, at least in theoretical physics. And I had a terrible time doing that. I would make it to shortlists, go and interview, and then not get an offer, which was almost worse than not making it to the shortlist, because it's like, on paper, I look pretty good, but as soon as they see me, something doesn't work, and they don't like me, and they don't give me an offer. And so this happened over and over a span of several years. Eventually, though, I came to UC Irvine and interviewed, and went back, and of course, they had to finish interviewing everyone else, but a couple of weeks later, I get a message on my answering machine in my office from Myron Bander, who was a senior particle physicist here for decades. And it says, please call me back. And I cannot tell you how happy I was to get that message. I was just crying with joy. And I actually waited 24 hours to call him back, because I thought if I call him back right now, I'm going to start crying. And he's going to go, who did we hire? I mean, this guy's so unprofessional. And so I waited 24 hours. I called him back. He told me, we'd like to make you a faculty offer. I said, thank you. That's wonderful. It's funny, years later, when I got to know Myron very well, he told me that because I waited 24 hours, they weren't so sure I was that excited about it. And it turned out it was a great negotiation tactic, because they thought, we better up the ante here to make sure he shows up. So that's advice for any of you who are getting offers. So anyway, Sue had a fantastic job in Boston, and so we deferred coming here for about 9 months. In that 9-month span, I got other offers, which was nice, but it was kind of like, I was waiting years and years and nobody gave me any offers, and now I get one, and now I get a whole bunch. I mean, what's wrong with you people? It's just so irritating. But these were from places, some of them were just, the places you dream of going to be a physics professor. And so these started coming in, and I started getting very overwhelmed. They had fantastic reasons that I should just go there. And so at one point I remember sat down with Sue and said, look at all these offers and what will you do? And Sue said, did you tell UC Irvine you were coming? And I said, yeah. And she said, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay, quoting the King James Version of the Bible. She actually says it wasn't King James. She was using the NIV version, but I remember it's King James because that just sounds so much more profound. Anyway, that just cut to the heart of the problem, and it was clear. So we came to Irvine. So I'm going to go long, so I should not say a ton, but just let me say, when I got to Irvine, it turned out to be a fantastic place. This place, when I got here, had been existing for about 35 years maybe, not that long. There were still founding faculty who were here and active and really playing a role in the department. And they were, they had grown this place from nothing, a bunch of cow pastures, to where it was, but they knew it could be a lot better. And so they were counting on their new hires to push them up to higher things. And so the junior faculty were treated like really the future, which in some sense they were, right? And I just give an example. Before I got tenure, I was put on as a co-chair of a search committee for the faculty search, which just never happens. I mean, it's just a crazy thing to do. But that happened, and we were asked to look for 2 cosmologists, so 2 instead of 1. Fantastic. We did a search, and turned out at the end we were deadlocked. So some of us liked 2 people, some of us liked 2 other people. We fought and fought and fought, couldn't decide. We decided we're going to have to go to the dean and let him figure this out. So we go into Dean Ron Stern's office, and we tell him, we can't decide. Some of us like these 2, some of us like these 2. And he said, why don't you just hire all 4 of them? Just incredible. And I still remember we were all in shock, and I looked at Gary Channon, who was my co-chair, and he's kind of going, which means, let's get out of here before he changes his mind. And so I swear that was about a 60-second meeting with the dean. That was the shortest meeting with the dean I've ever had. And we got out of there, and we made 4 offers. These people had tons of offers elsewhere, but they all came to UCI because they understood we were trying to do something new here. And they've all done fantastically well. 2 of them are the Dean of Physical Sciences, James Bullock now, and the Chair of Physics and Astronomy, Manoj Kaplinger. Those are 2 out of the 4. But that was kind of the spirit in those days, and it was very exciting to be a part of. So what do I actually do now? I showed you that article from Scientific American. We're trying to understand what the universe is made out of. Turns out we're not doing a very good job. We know about 5% of the universe, and the other 95%, no one really knows what it is. If I were to try to drive home to you the crazy situation we're in, trying to understand the universe when we only understand 5% of it, imagine trying to understand Shakespeare when the only letter you can see is H. That's about 5% of the alphabet. And just think of all the meaning and structure you're missing because you don't know anything about the other 25 letters. That's what we're doing right now. And so it's a very exciting field because we're trying to do something that can really expand our understanding of who we are and our universe and where we're going. But it's also pretty daunting because every time I go to the office, I realize I'm studying something that we may never discover. It could be discovered next year. I'm doing this experiment that has a chance to actually see something really exciting, and so are many other people in the world. But it could take 500 years, really, honestly, and we don't know. I think it's an exciting endeavor, and it's a noble endeavor. It's worth doing, but high risk, high gain. When we talk about things like the universe and the origin and the future of the universe, a lot of other things come in particular, things having to do with science and faith. And so in just the last few minutes, let me just mention sort of my views on this, because this is certainly stuff that matters to me, and I want to say a bit about why. So there are, of course, people who consider science and faith to be completely at odds with each other. People even talk about the war between science and faith. And if you listen to people on the extremes, you would certainly think it's a war. But you shouldn't. Because, well, if everything they said was true, people like me, who are Christians and scientists, would have our heads explode. Because, how could we possibly keep these two thoughts in the same place? For me, actually, there's a fantastic synergy between these things. So I think that if you believe in an omnipotent, omniscient God, that's a pretty humbling thing if you really absorb that fact. It's very hard to think that you're at the center of the universe and that your business is all that important. And as I said, if you go to the office and study dark matter, you pretty much get that same message. It's very hard to think you're the center of the universe when the stuff you're made out of is just this little smudge, 5% smudge on the universe. And so I think, in fact, they reinforce each other in this feeling of humility. And I don't think that I or many of my colleagues are the first people to think that way. In fact, if we go to this guy, Isaac Newton, you can see him saying the exact same thing. He was, of course, one of the greatest physicists of all time, but also a very serious student of religion. In fact, I think he wrote more about religion than science. And he has this quote, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself in, now and then, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." And that expresses, even from the greatest physicist of his time, just this feeling of humility of this great ocean of truth. And I think from the view of someone who believes in a God, and also from a scientist view who really feels this today, this is a very consistent way of thinking about things. Of course, it's more than that. It also informs why we do what we do. So I think most people, I would actually say all people who study the fundamental laws of physics, come away with a sense of wonder. It's amazing what we know, how far we've come. If you think about the mathematics that is required to understand the world, it's just truly amazing that this stuff actually corresponds to reality. And everyone says this. So Einstein, in his great way, said it. He said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. And that is absolutely a true feeling I feel, and I think many people do, whether they're theists or atheists. Of course, if you're someone who believes in God, there's another layer to this, because there's some understanding of why we're able to sort of follow in the Creator's footsteps, because we're created by that same person. And it leads to actually a very full life where you can be motivated to study science by your faith, and you can also be enriched, well, in both ways, in science and faith by the other one. So this also has precedent. Let me just show one last quote. This is from James Clerk Maxwell, who, of course, is the namesake for Maxwell's equations, and yet another very devout Christian who's also a great scientist. And he says, so bear with me, this is a little bit old English, this is from the mid-1800s or so. "I think Christians whose minds are scientific are bound to study science, that their view of the glory of God may be as extensive as their being is capable." So he's saying, rather than thinking of science and faith as two competing things, and oh my goodness, if we learn something in science, then we've pushed the God of the gaps into a smaller corner. He's saying it's not like that at all to me. In fact, when I learn something new, when I observe the universe like this, actually it just brings home to me the glory of God. And for me, that's also a fantastic way to look at it. So these are some of the things that matter to me, and I think I'll stop here. Thanks for listening.
Great. Well, thank you for that wonderful talk. I think I'm going to take my prerogative and just say, can you say a little bit about whether your faith informs your personal life and views, or is it just sort of on this grand cosmic scale?
No, yeah. So definitely at the personal scale too. So you're right. I didn't talk as much about that. But I kind of referenced it obliquely when I sort of jokingly talked about this decision we had to make of where to go, and yay be yay and nay be nay. Certainly, I think our religious views are very serious in our lives, and they seep into our decision making and how we raise our kids and everything.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the very nice talk. Are there questions? We have a few minutes for questions. Yes, and wait for the mic to come to you.
Yeah, thanks for the awesome talk, Jonathan. I have one question. So you were talking about your experience as a postdoc, and you kept getting these rejections and rejections and rejections, but despite this, you keep going. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more how you felt during that time and what kept you going.
Well, I felt terrible. It was so you finish grad school, at least in our field, you don't expect to get a job right away. You do at least one postdoc. So, okay, 3 years of postdoc. But then after that, you're kind of on the market, and it was very trying to continually keep butting up against things. And there were reasons for it. I think I didn't quite understand how a postdoc is supposed to play the game. And there was this other fact that there were other fields nearby who were just becoming the hottest thing of all. And so they were basically sucking all the air out of the room. But the thing that kept me going, I think, is that I was still working with fantastic people. I mean, we were writing great papers. We were doing science at the highest level, I felt. And there was a feeling, I think, that, it's got to happen sometime. So, maybe also the point is that I can't do anything else. So, okay, what else am I going to do? But certainly, I think there was just a feeling that something's going to happen, but it sure took a long time.
Jonathan, why did you decide not to work with Hawking? Because you had gone to Cambridge planning to work with Hawking, and then you decided not to when you were given the opportunity.
Well, so this is why I told the whole story about feeling like others didn't really think that I belonged there. So yeah, I went there with this sort of dream, and it kind of got knocked out of me. I think, when you're in grad school, you need to be comfortable. You need to, it's a hard time. It's a time when you are going to be frustrated and feel stupid. And if you also feel like the sort of society around you is not really supportive, that could be a real killer. And so I think as I was going along, still studying like crazy, 16 hours a day, trying to do very well in the exam, some other part of me was thinking, this might not be the best thing to do, even if you get the offer. And so by the time the offer came, I was pretty sure I wasn't going to take it.
Okay, so we have time for maybe one more question. Anyone? Or on Zoom, is there any? Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Kevin. This is Kevin Bossenmeyer.
Can you hear me?
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
Hey, it was actually that same question that Claire just asked about why you decided not to accept the offer from Stephen Hawking. So you've answered it.
Yeah.
Thank you. This has just been an extraordinary presentation for me today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kevin.
There's somebody else who's raised their hand. See we who?
Hey, Professor Feng. My name is Siwei. I'm a fifth-year PhD student from civil engineering. I'm also full of Christ, also using the King James Bible. I'm wondering, how are you convinced that God is the God described in the Bible, not the one written in other religious scriptures?
Well, this would take us farther afield. There's a whole lot of other things that inform people's choice in religion than just whether the universe was created or not. And I would say that, if you really want to assess the truth of like the Christian Gospels, you need to talk to people who aren't physicists. You need to talk to New Testament scholars. You need to talk to philosophers. You need to talk to others. So I think I'm going to punt on that one, but I do have reasons, and I can direct you to some of the great scholars that I have read that have informed my thinking on this, and maybe correspond with you.
All right. Well, I think in light of the time, we need to end it here. But let's thank Jonathan again for a wonderful talk, and he'll be around later.